Good afternoon, everybody. It's Monday, and it might not be sun shining as much as we'd like, but it's not snowing. So tell us in the chat something good for Monday. Did you have a good student interaction? Did you have the perfect cup of coffee this morning? Tell us something good in the chat. It's over. I like that one.
Some days are like that.
Yep.
Some Mondays are like that.
Oh yeah, going outside for recess, that is so much better. I'm glad you found your keys, Paula. It's always good when the day goes quick.
Gail said she had a nice training today, so that was good. It's a good thing.
I did.
A great start to a Monday, sounds like. Kristen, coffee from her favorite place.
Yeah, I had a great training this morning, so that was good. Oh, I'm glad you're recovering from the flu. Oh, day one of iRead.
Keep breathing, keep breathing.
Oh, good. You had a
Solid.
fantastic morning and stayed in class, and that is awesome. That is awesome. Okay, so today we are going to talk about prompting. You can go. So remember, first and foremost, all students are general education students first. And in order to help them access the gen ed curriculum and stay in the least restrictive environment, we need all hands on deck, and that includes paras. I had a lot of paras and I couldn't have done without them. So know that you are important. All right. Next. So today we're going to talk about prompting. We're going to talk about the levels of prompting and how you can support students in the classroom, the impact of different prompts depending on the environment, how to scaffold the prompts, and some strategies for targeting, for providing targeted assistance. Because we want the students to be able to generalize from one setting to the other, which sometimes is hard for kids. And our main goal is when they get to that grade 12 and they're aging out, that they are as independent as possible. So we want to use our prompting to help them gain independence, not make them dependent on us, the prompters. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So here is the Padlet. I know you've had it before, but again, you can go to the Padlet and find out all sorts of information. I always like to say, if you find a resource that you find really helpful, then if you email that to one of us, myself, Alana, Alisa, Nikki, or Katie, we would be glad to add it to the Padlet for everybody's use. So if you find something that's helpful for you, send it to one of us so that we can share it. So the definition of prompting is doing something to persuade, encourage, or remind someone to do or say something. Now, there are different methods of prompting. You can prompt a student to prevent them from making a mistake. So that is called errorless learning, where you don't just tell them the answer, but you keep prompting them through so that they get the right answer and they don't have a mistake. But then you have to learn to fade that so that they start to do it independently. And then the other way is to wait until a student starts something. And if they make a mistake, you prompt them then. And sometimes that wait is very difficult because we're just ready to jump in. And I timed myself once when I was working with a student, and I swear it seemed like it was 10 minutes long, and it had been 30 seconds. So you have to learn to kind of stop and wait and maybe give another prompt to see what the student can do, because we don't want them to wait you out so you just tell them the answer. We want them to get the answer themselves. because we want them to be able to do things with the least amount of insistence. So there are different types of prompting. You have verbal cues, nonverbal cues, and pictures. And verbal cues are the most dependent. If you always are telling somebody how to do something, they are dependent on you to tell them. If you can move to a picture, like I always give the example of when you teach a kindergartner or a preschooler teach a preschooler how to wash their hands, you talk them through all the steps of washing their hands, turning the water on, doing the soap, lathering up, drying off. After a while, if you go into a preschool class, there's just those little pictures by the sink that the kids can use to prompt themselves about how to wash their hands. You're making them independent. Pretty soon, they don't even need to look at the pictures. You have verbal prompting, direct and indirect. And direct prompting is when you clearly state what the kid should do. This is what I want you to do. If you're indirectly prompting, you're asking them the question, what should you do next? To try to get them to think about what they need to do instead of you telling them. Obviously, modeling is showing them how to do something, or you can gesture. So a gesture would be like a pointing at something, that facial expressions, using emotion to cue kids. My teacher used to go and point on the board where she had written how she wanted us to head the papers. She didn't have to say anything after a while, she just pointed. So those would be prompts. And lastly, partial or full. Now, we're not talking about restraint. We are talking about prompting. And most of the prompts that are physical are going to be for students that maybe don't have a lot of hand control. So you need to actually guide their hand, or blind students, you use a lot of either with their hands over yours or under yours so that you're helping them see how to do it. It is not in any way a restraint. It's just helping those students that's going to be for kids that are more, have more difficulties. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we are going to try really hard.
We're going to introduce Hobbes if we can.
Boy, good boy, Hobbs. Boy, Hobbs. Good boy. Good boy, Hobbs. Good boy. Good boy, you made it. You made it.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alisa, and I'm kind of joining the team here. It's fun. But what you saw, actually, there, if you were able to see the video, there might be some prompts that you saw as a part of the process of moving Hobbes
I brought her
towards.
into my nursery at home where we have like oxygen bubble. Sally came to me from a breeder that couldn't take care of her any longer. She's got really bad pneumonia. probably aspirated while nursing on mom, and she was blue, like she was gasping for air. I immediately put her, just calm down with oxygen at first. And maybe after about 30 minutes of her being
Is that coming from
she
one
was
of
back
our?
to pink.
Gail, is that yours?
I
To actually intake enough oxygen.
Hold on.
She was completely
First we have no sound, then we have. So, this is a fun adventure today.
Okay,
Okay.
let's see. Try now. I don't know. Okay, so
Are we good
I
for the
think
moment?
we're-
Well,
okay,
you have everyone has the link, and if you really want to take a moment and smile a bit, when you have a chance, go ahead and watch Hobbs and his owners work through the process of going down the stairs. You didn't get a chance to hear, well, there were a couple of verbal things there that you could hear perhaps, but we know that there are verbal prompts, there are physical prompts, and then there's modeling. And if you just think back at what you just saw, there were some places where Hobbs' owner actually did something physically to support him and to help him. What were some of those things you might have seen? And you're welcome to unmute and say it or put it in the chat. Anything coming?
Well, he modeled it how to get down or how to go down that first step. And then there was feedback along with it from the mom or whoever. Like, you got it, good boy. Keep
Yeah, there were a
going.
lot.
So it was like physical modeling and
Mhm.
reinforcement with.
Did anybody notice that there was a couple of places where Hobbs kind of got a little bit, nervous perhaps, and he tried to turn around a couple times, and they continued to encourage him, and his pops was there walking right beside him and kind of holding his little body so that he could stay steady to do the next step. Those are all prompts. Those are all physical, and we didn't hear more of the verbal, but there would be prompts as well. And then the modeling, that side by side. Sometimes it was with words, sometimes it was just him kind of moving along down the steps with the dog. We've got a couple of chats, I think, that popped up there. Modeling how to, that one. Any other?
They talked about the encouragement and they really like the encouragement. That's positive feedback.
yeah.
Well, should we go ahead on to the,
Yeah, try to show the next one, Alana.
All right.
This one doesn't have sound, so.
yeah. Just for the record, that is not the type of prompting that we're encouraging anybody use.
Yeah, that's a mom that just says go.
Just do it already. Ready, set, go. Or I'm going to count to 5 and you go 1, 2, push. You never get
I'll
to
see you
5.
tomorrow after my.
Well, let's see. I'm sorry you didn't get to hear the first one, but you can go back and circle back and get it. One of the things we want to make sure that we share with you when we talk about prompting is one of our goals is ensuring success in the student. We really want this to be student-driven, for the student to own it. And that means sometimes we're going to have to minimize distractions. And if there's confusion, we need to make sure that there's a great deal of clarity in what the expectations are, what the directions are. We want to be able to assist a student towards self-regulation, but we've got to make sure that we understand the behaviors that are okay for that setting and the behaviors that are inappropriate for that setting, so that we can prompt or we can correct as we need to. Again, so that the student begins to feel and see and do the behavior that we want to have them doing as independently as possible. So that instructional time is going to be critical. Having opportunities for positive reinforcement, anytime we can catch them doing it in the manner that we're trying to teach, that's a small success that can grow into a larger one. And then again, we're aiming towards future success where they're able to be independent and hopefully to develop some positive relationships with those that are around them. We know that success increases the likelihood of more success. And so that's our target. Next slide.
All right. So I think that I'm taking over for the scaffolded prompts. So I'm going to show you guys kind of a systematic way to use our prompting. Before prompting, and this is with me, I had paraprofessionals and they would get hired and I would say, okay, you get to work with these students, you get to help these students. But I never really taught them what that means. How about you guys? Thumbs up or thumbs down if you guys are paraprofessionals. You're going to help those kids. Well, what am I going to do? Well, you're going to help them do their work. But I never really got to teach my paras kind of how to do that. So hopefully these are some strategies that you can use with your students. I'm Alana, if you haven't been here with me before. So I have had 3 paraprofessionals in my room for about 15 years when I was a classroom teacher. So we worked really well together. And then when I co-taught, I worked with paraprofessionals in that section.
You're getting thumbs
So when
up.
we're thinking about, yeah, great. So when we're thinking about who needs prompting, I want you to think about your students that you work with. And this is one thing that you can do. You can write down the tasks that students need help with. When thinking about if students needed a paraprofessional to work with them, I would have to fill out this chart and with the para, and I would say, these are the things that they're able to do by themselves. These are the things that they're able to do with help. So we're going to try to help figure out how we can provide supports for teaching students to move to need help from independence or interdependence. That means how can we provide prompts, but then we can back it off so students are able to do something by themselves, that's independence, or interdependence, that means with a peer instead of an adult. So let's say, for example, if a student needs help with starting a work task, at first you're going to have to go over there every time, every day, right? Now we're in March, but let's say in August, you're going to have to go to that student. Okay, the teacher said turn to this page or go to this Canvas module or do this. And you're physically over there as a paraprofessional, right in their space, and you're telling them to do that. Well, over time, we're going to try to scaffold our prompts, and we're going to be less intrusive so that they could do something on their own. And maybe it's like what Gail talked about, a gesture. Then they look at you and you just say, time to start work, or you do like this, like a writing. And then the student looks at you and they see that gesture. So you're not going over there anymore. You're going from physically walking over to that student, giving them a verbal prompt. And I'm going to show you what that looks like on like a ladder that we have. And you're going to go backwards, and then they're going to be able to do things themselves, because we want to move them from you doing it, being prompt dependent on the paraprofessional or the other teacher, to letting them do something on their own, or even maybe a peer, instead of you doing it, the peer said, hey, Joey, she said, turn to page 2 or go to Canvas module 4 instead of you doing it, because that is less intrusive than the paraprofessional. And there's many other things you could do in the classroom. So don't worry, I'm not going to get you out of a job or anything like that. So we're going to think about this. So if you go to school tomorrow, or if you're going to go next Monday, can you think about your students in your class? What things can they do by themselves? And what things do you still need help with? That would be a first baseline that we can think about this way. And I'm going to give you some strategies to work the way through. And Gail and Alisa, if you see anything in the chat, please,
I will.
Please let me know. So before you prompt, we're going to build relationships, because our paras in our classroom, we did a really good job with, I know that they had assigned, some of them had to be assigned with certain students, but they also worked with all students in our classroom. So if I was in a co-taught classroom, there were small groups. The paraprofessionals were able to work with the students they were assigned with, but they also worked with other students in the class so that we can eliminate that stigma and we can build confidence, so that they were able to help any student that was in the classroom and just another adult helper. Like, I forgot what the teacher said about this direction, and then they were able to help everybody. So that just helps with those building relationships in the classroom and making that sense of community, that the para is not always right next to that person that they're assigned to, but they really kind of mingle around. Gail talked about this earlier too, watch before helping, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a systematic way, but look at what they're doing when they approach the task. So when the teacher gives the directions, just watch the student, see what they do. jot something down. I know that word data is really scary because you're like, it just sounds a little bit scary, but even if you just note, do they wait? Do they look around? Do they start doing something? Do they really not do anything until you go and help them? But give them some time to see how they're going to approach that task. And you guys know your kids. We're in March. So are there signs of consideration or distress? Do you know if something's really, really hard that they just shut down? Some of your students, right? Some of them, like if it's something is really hard, you see that look on their face and they just kind of just don't even, they just like sit down or they throw something or they throw their pencil. So you know that that's going to happen, but how do we teach them some of those coping skills to help before we prompt? I'm gonna go through these in a different, the later slide. Allow for processing time. Some of our students, especially with learning disabilities or even students with autism, if you say a direction and you don't give them enough time and then you say it again, their brain has to go back and rethink about what you said again. They have to process that again. So every time you interrupt them without, you keep saying it, just give them some time to just think about it first. Wait patiently.
Another thing I'll say about the waiting is, especially at the beginning, you have to wait long enough for them to reply, because kids will just wait you out. And you will think, okay, I'm going to wait 5 minutes. They'll wait 5 minutes because then they know. So the next time you're going to have to wait 10 because they aren't going to answer. They're just going to keep pushing it out and waiting you out. So when you first meet the kids, try to see how long it does take them to respond, so that you can allow enough wait time. Just because, and I will say, it will seem like forever to you, but really helpful in the end. So I have one comment. It says, I have a student who gives me a panic look when she is overwhelmed during a math test. Yes, that's perfect, Joyce. Like you've learned to recognize that so that you know when to step in.
Absolutely, that's great. Yes, and that's the kind of data. That's data. But it's not data's numbers, but it's also your observations, and that is great data that you said. And you can give the teacher that information. You know that you need some help, and she might just do that on a like every time she gets a math test, she kind of does that look because she knows she needs some help. But that is great data to kind of write down, talk about with the TOR at sometimes. And then create peer support, and we're going to talk about what that looks like, but maybe setting up those strategies with your classroom. So you know that your student's able to, maybe he can't read at grade level or she can't read at grade level, but maybe the neighbor can read the direction to the student instead of you. So work with your table partner to answer number one. You can set some of those things up as long as the teacher is okay with that, maybe talking about that, but having them work with a person rather than an adult is less intrusive than you always having to go and work with those kids. And we are going to talk about what that looks like.
I'm going to interrupt you again so I have two comments.
Yeah.
One is that I have a student that is very argumentative, but if I do if, then he will comply. So that's a great strategy to use, the if in. I have a student who stares at her paper every time she has to write that. I get that. Like, what are you?
We're going to go through a scenario that has that exact thing in there. So that's perfect. Perfect.
Right. So Carrie says, I have a student who just responds no when I ask them a question. So Carrie, what do you do then if they just say no? What do you do?
We have scenarios so we can go through it too. But yeah, if you want to unmute, we can talk about that too.
Because that's a hard one. It's hard when kids just say no.
As a former teacher of students with emotional behavior disorders, sometimes kids freeze and they don't know what the question even is they should ask, or they just freeze. And sometimes we can give them a few words to get started. You were looking at your math problem. What's the first thing that you're thinking about when you look at that math problem? And then sometimes that can kind of help them to, it's not just this, it's the whole thing. It's just take one little piece at a time,
right?
Kind of unload, unpack until they can breathe again.
Just that, okay, I'm just going to say this answer. I'm going to say it all the time to give my brain time to think about what to do next, or what I don't know and I need to ask. So yeah, like the student who says, I don't know. Okay, that sometimes that's a tactic to try to figure out. So here's a good one. We write on a Post-it what is next and sit it in front of one of our third graders. Then we go with the group. He responds to notes better than voices. That's knowing your student. That is an awesome idea.
That is
That's
enough.
all I got.
Yes. I love
everybody.
this
I
is
like
this is
your-
why we're using the chat, because you guys can talk out your problems and then somebody maybe could give you an idea and you can use it, the strategy. I'll give you some ideas and we're going to walk through a case scenario, but real people strategies, like case scenarios that come from your classroom, is even better. So I love this. So
Right. Okay. I repeat the question, or I get her to at least talk to me. Sometimes you can ask a student, what did the teacher say? What are you supposed to do? So if you can get them to verbalize back to you what they're supposed to do, you can also then figure out maybe what step they're missing. All right, go ahead.
All right, you guys, great job. Great job with the chat. I love how interactive you are. I really appreciate it. We're going to go through a fake scenario and I'm going to show you this really cool tool that I really like. And I hope you guys like this too. So this is our visual ladder, the prompting ladder. And I did not make this up. I wish I did. This is amazing. I wish I had this when I was teaching. So this is Dr. Preddy Franzak and Dr. Julie Costin, and they have you know, we paid for this, for access to this, but we're able to share this with you guys. And it talks about the most restrictive or to the least restrictive prompts. So we say that we don't want to go up the ladder. We're going to fall down. Is anybody else scared of heights? Because I am. I got older all of a sudden and I was on a gondola and I was really scared. I was freaked out. I've had like nightmares from it. And I never used to be like that. So that kind of resonates with me with the ladder. I'm going to stay down to the bottom. So as we're paraprofessionals and we're working with students in groups, the most restrictive or the most intrusive prompts are the top. And the top, of course, is the full physical. And we kind of talked about this with Gail, kind of talked about this with that the student, maybe the student that's not able to eat on their own. So a full physical would be you hand over hand with their fork, helping them put their food in their mouth because they're not able, maybe they're in kindergarten, maybe they haven't had the low tone, they haven't been able to do that yet. A partial physical would be, you would just put your hand on their elbow and they're able to do it once you kind of start it. A verbal prompt is, okay, Tony, it's time to eat now. Get your fork and put it in your mouth with the rice. Great. A visual prompt, I would have a picture of a food or a fork, and I would just pull it up, and then the student would start eating while I would do that. Modeling it is, I'm going to have my own fork. I'm going to pretend I'm going to model how to eat it, and then I'm going to show them how to do it, and then the student's going to do it. Indirect verbal prompt, I'm going to say, okay, it's lunchtime. What do I need to eat with my rice? And then the students should be able to pick up the fork and start eating. A gesture would be me just, pretend eating with no fork. Wait time is just me waiting to see what they do. When it's lunchtime and there's rice and a fork next to them, do they start on their own? And then natural cue would be all the other students are eating. I'm going to notice if my student notices that they're eating and start eating too. And then the invisible materials would be maybe I raise up their table so it's less time for them to get the fork into their mouth. Or maybe I put, there's fork extenders. My OT were great about that. And they would have something to help like a modified fork or a bigger spoon so that they could start with this. Maybe they can start with a spoon because that's an invisible material. I'm not doing anything, but I set them up for success. I just use this whole ladder in a fake scenario with a student that I probably have had in my past. And we're going to think about, as paraprofessionals, where we usually land when we work with students in class. So as you see this ladder, we want to stay at the bottom, right? Like me, like I want to stay at the bottom. I want to stay with my feet on the ground. So we don't want to do full physical unless we absolutely have to. And sometimes students, maybe with mobility issues, you have to kind of take them in the wheelchair and pull them because they don't have an electric one. So we might have to stay there for some of those things. But thinking about this in a school setting is really, really awesome, I think, because we can see where we give these prompts to, and we can see how we can go less intrusive on some of these things. And I see a couple chats, so I don't know what they're saying because I can't open it, but I'm going to stop now and see if anybody.
Okay,
Nikki just shared the Padlet on the Padlet.
Today, one student just started crying as he doesn't want to do the writing work. He took at least 5 minutes. It took at least 5 minutes for me to calm down him down and then explain to him how to get the answers from his reading book. Some kids don't like to do the work till they know how to do it. And that's true. So it's good that you calmed him, but still required the work. So it's like, okay, I know you're frustrated, but we're still going to do it. I've also found that many students do not want to go back in the text and find the answers. Yeah, it's much easier if you just tell them. But sometimes helping them know what keywords to look for, because those textbooks and the vocabulary words are usually in bold. So helping them find ways to look back in the text, because some kids think they have to read it all again, but try to maybe help them learn how to look for those keywords that they're looking for. Oh, Nikki put in the link to the ladder resource on our Padlet. Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, well, I think this is just a great reminder. This is a great visual for for you guys if you want to use this. And we're going to talk through a case scenario to see how we can move from a little bit higher up the ladder down lower to see if we can go down. And so we're going to talk this out.
And one of the things that I learned when I was listening to Julie talk about the ladder is it's like Alana's sphere of going up the ladder. You should go up the ladder only as far as you need to go and then get down as fast as you can.
Absolutely,
So,
yeah.
However long that takes, but so.
Yes, so we're thinking about this. So what about you guys? Put it in the chat. What are your go-to prompts with students? Do you think that you land more on the verbal prompts, on the visual prompts? I just kind of gave you some examples of what that would look like, and that would be maybe more of a skills-based, but you could think about anything, teaching math, teaching reading. What prompts do you usually go to with students first? And where would they fall on that ladder? So kind of the top, the middle, or the bottom? Where do we think?
I got a visual, mostly visual.
And I thought about that with myself because I taught students with autism. So a lot of visual prompts as well. And until I saw this ladder, I thought the visual was not like most intrusive, but more on the lower side. And here it's a little bit high. I was like, oh, I could have done some other things. So it's kind of an interesting way to look at that with my own teaching and how I see more responses.
More towards the top, just my one-on-one. Verbal and gestures. Usually verbal first, then gestures. Totally depends on the child.
I found that working with students that that had some behavioral concerns, again, if I could gesture and use wait time and not say anything in that moment, sometimes that was better than starting a verbal back and forth.
Absolutely. And you know your students, as you guys know. It's just kind of cool to see this ladder and see how all of the little parts underneath it. That's how I felt when I saw this. I was like, wow, okay, how do I get down to the bottom? How do I get to those? What are the invisible materials? What is that? How can I use that a little bit more? So we're going to go through a case scenario, and then we're going to talk about how we can use some of those ones at the bottom. Of course, sometimes we need to use a visual prompt, but maybe we can get down to the bottom too.
So somebody said, this is a really good comment, Renee, that her room uses a variety of levels. So it's a variety of levels. So we use a wide range of nearly all of these prompts, depending on the material being taught. And that is huge, because you might be the same student, but depending on how difficult the subject matter that you're helping them with, you're going to use a different prompt, probably a more intrusive prompt if it's something that's more difficult for them. So that is absolutely a good idea. So just because it's this kid, but to be able to concentrate on depending on the subject matter is a great idea.
So I'm just introducing to this. We kind of went through them, and I'm going to read this case scenario, and I want you guys, while I'm reading it, to write down the prompts that Ms. Thompson is giving to Lucas. So if you have a piece of paper next to you, this would be a good time to just write it. What kind of prompts do you see? Do you see a visual? Do you see a verbal? What kind of prompts are the most prompts that Ms. Thompson's using? And then we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to read this to you. Ms. Thompson gives her class direction for a narrative writing assignment about a fun day and instructs them to get to work. One student, Lucas, is staring at the blank page in front of him, looking overwhelmed. She walks over and gently kneels beside him, offering a series of guided prompts. Lucas, can you think of a time when something exciting happened to you? She asks. Lucas hesitates, so she continues. Maybe something at the park or a trip you took. Slowly, Lucas starts nodding, recalling a fun day at the zoo. Miss Thompson smiles and asks, what was the first animal you saw when you walked in? Can you describe it for me? Lucas begins to describe a zebra, and she encourages him further. With each prompt, Lucas begins to shape his ideas, feeling more confident, engaged in the task. This is a scenario that I have seen many times. I don't think it's out of the ordinary. Gail and Alisa probably can agree with that. It's probably, there's given an assignment, a student doesn't know what to do, there's a blank sheet in front of them, and a pair walks over and kind of kneels and talks to them and talks out through this. So we're going to first talk about the prompts. Where do they land? So what prompts were used to support Lucas? Again, use the chat if you can. Hopefully you wrote some of those down. And where would they fall on the ladder? You don't have to like quote the scenario, but what kind of prompts did she use? And then how could we maybe do it differently? How could we go lower on that ladder? And I'm going to take my own advice and give wait time.
So we have verbal. If you want to talk, you can unmute yourselves.
Absolutely.
Verbal.
So remember, verbal's up here and the third one at the top. So how can we, so everybody kind of put verbal, yep. So thinking about, Ms. Thompson did a lot of verbal prompts.
Indirect verbal.
And indirect verbal, yes. So could we go any low? How could we do it? Let's start at the bottom. Let's start at invisible materials. Could there be a way that she could have set that up prior to the lesson for invisible materials, possibly? And again, invisible materials is those things that help students start an assignment or help them organize their thoughts or help them.
Making a chart of ideas for the class to choose from.
That's a great idea.
Maybe if they had a class discussion about, we just went to the zoo and, then made that list.
Organizers. Picture prompts. Yeah, I used to have, when I taught middle school language arts and we were going to write about like Halloween, we would have just a shout out roundabout. Everybody would just shout out words that they thought about Halloween, and I would write them up on the overhead. And that way the kids then could spell the words because I would spell them correctly, but it just helped give them ideas for words to use. And then when they started writing their story, it wasn't like from scratch. They had like a word list to get started. Graphic organizers, discussing and writing some ideas on the board.
The hamburger chart was on there.
An open-ended sentence at the top of the page again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys see this as we're talking through this case scenario. I have seen this happen when a teacher gives directions and then a student's like, I don't know where to start, or they shut down. And typically you just go over there and you do the verbal prompt. You physically go over there and you ask those probing questions or you ask indirect questions. But you guys just gave us all of these things that you could do in invisible materials, and see where that lands. That is the least intrusive. That is amazing that you guys came up with these things. So knowing this about your student, knowing you have a writing prompt tomorrow, could you organize something beforehand if the teacher hasn't done it, because we're going in as a lens as a paraprofessional? So maybe take a small group and you could do this on the board, or maybe if they have whiteboards, that would be great. You guys gave us those examples. But instead of just going over there and asking all these questions for them to answer, you guys gave all of these great ideas for using invisible materials. And that is the least intrusive way to support a student. So that is just kind of what we wanted to talk about with this environment, because I know that this is probably something that you have experienced. Thumbs up or thumbs down. Have you guys experienced this in class where students don't really know where to get started? And then you kind of go over there and talk it out. But how could we maybe go down the ladder, as Gail said, so we don't fall off? And then you can go back up if you need to do the verbal or indirect. But the verbal prompt is pretty high up there. So where are some of those scaffolding strategies that we can use with kids? I see some more chats. So anybody else have anything before I move on to the next? Do we have anything else, Gail? Are we?
Well, I just had sentence starters, pair up for discussions, open-ended sentences.
You guys are awesome. These are great. These are all great ideas. I just think until you realize or recognize all of the things that you can do over here in invisible materials, or those natural cues, or those wait time, versus just going straight over there and giving verbal prompts. And you guys have hit it right on the head thinking about those.
And this kids, when they get the positive that they did it themselves, yeah, you might have had to start them out with a word bank, or you might have had to start them out with a sentence starter, but they actually are proud of themselves when they know that they've done something, and you can then encourage that, that they actually did it themselves. They didn't need as much help from you as they thought they did. So you can always encourage them that way to kind of snowball their success.
And those are great ideas. And hopefully you guys got a strategy out of it that you can try, versus always going straight over and kind of doing that. And we are in March. So of course, at first you might have to go over there and talk those things out, but I think pretty soon you can get that from independence or interdependence. Maybe a peer can help them versus you. So those are just kind of how we scaffold that to the independence. And then we're going to fade our prompts. So we're going to develop student independence. We're going to talk about what fading prompts are. And thank you guys for using that chat. Please keep using that chat. So this is a gradual release model. Thumbs up or thumbs down if you've heard of this before. But this is what talking about, in my school, we talked about I do, we do, you do. If you guys have heard of this before. So say a student needs another repeat of the model of the lesson. And you guys are in math class. And let's just say you're doing first grade. So you're just learning how to do story problems. So what you do is you take a small group, or if you're a paraprofessional, you take some students, hopefully your student and some other kids in the group, and they're like, they need another model. So what you do is, I used to have my students sit on their hands. And when I would model it, you have to think about your thinking. So I would say, okay, we're gonna do this word problem in math. And we're gonna say, Gail has 7 pizzas and Alisa has 8 pizzas. How many do they have all together? Well, I know that I'm going to box my numbers. So you're gonna say this. I'm gonna box my numbers, and I know the word altogether means addition. So I'm gonna use my plus sign. And so I'm gonna do the problem. I'm gonna write it out, and I'm gonna think about my thinking out loud, and I'm gonna say every step that happens. I'm not gonna let my students butt in or answer questions or say, oh, I know the answer. I'm going to think about my thinking by myself, and I'm going to say, this is my time. You cannot talk, like you guys are going to put your hands down. It's going to be very short, but I'm going to model my thinking. That is I do. The we do is you're going to do it with me. So the next one, we're going to do another word problem, and we're going to do it exactly the same way, but this time you get to talk. So you're going to, what do we box in again, guys? We box in the numbers. What does all together mean again? It means addition, but they get to talk to you this time after they saw you think about your thinking the whole way through. You do is when I'm going to watch you, but I'm going to give you feedback. So you guys are going to do it together with maybe a partner or a small group. You guys are going to do it together. I'm going to walk around, or if I have a small group, if I'm a paraprofessional, I have a small group, I'm going to watch you guys do it, but I'm not going to say anything unless you're doing something wrong or you need some clarification. Then I'm going to have them do it on their own. I'm going to say, okay, now it's time for Gail and Alisa to do by themselves. They have their own work. And then when they're done, I'll be able to see if they understood what I modeled again. So that's after the teacher already has modeled this, and maybe a pair pools in a small group and then they're going to model it again. This would be using the gradual release model. So this is when you think about your thinking, practice it with each other, and they do it together, and then they do it on their own. So I don't know, I haven't seen the chat, but I don't know if you've seen this or not, but that is gradual.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up?
Mhm.
Perfect. So if you haven't, that's what it's called. You can look it up for more, but that is explicit instruction. All students probably need explicit instruction. They all do, but students especially that need 1 or 2 more tries to practice, this is a systematic way to do it, and it's very structured. And I think what helped my kids was sit on your hands so you guys can't write, you can't talk, you kind of just have to watch me first. And then that's the first part of that. Anybody else have anything in the chat, Gail? I'm sorry, I can't see it.
I would interrupt you. Just all thumbs up. Lots of thumbs up.
Perfect, thanks. Does anybody want to add anything to that, or I'm going to move on? We good. Alisa and Gail, you guys good? All right. So how do I know, and you guys probably know this, but how do I know that the students are ready for me to fade my prompt? Well, you could look at that data, like you can say, okay, and I love this because we talked about this before we even start prompting, what can they do by themselves? What can they do with help? Looking at it through that lens. But we know that when students avoid us, or maybe they start the work before we come, we don't have to go running over there. So we have to use our wait time. And then we see, okay, they're starting the assignment. So we don't need to go over there. We're going to wait for a second. And then if they're kind of like ditching us, like they don't really want us to be around anymore, maybe we're going to let the peer start them on their assignment. Or maybe if they need help with the reading, but the writing they can do it, or vice versa, we're going to let them do as much on their own as possible. So we really want to see what they can do instead of just assuming that they can't do all of it, because we know that sometimes students are able to do some parts of everything. They don't need us for every single thing. So let's see what kind of things that they're able to do. For example, I had students that had a hard time with academics in my co-taught classrooms, but they were really good at basketball and volleyball and PE. They did not need me to help them with that. They did need help because in structured times, I had a student that had a visual impairment, and in the hallway, he would think that other students were bumping into him then he would like try to fight them, but they weren't. They were just bumping into them because it's a middle school, and that's just what happens sometimes. So I had to make sure that I'm like, okay, the para first started walking him during, we called it success period. I'm not sure if you guys know what that is, but after the bell rings, that they have to walk by themselves in the hallway. So then the para had to walk him to the classrooms. Well, he didn't like that at all. So we're like, let's think of how can we make it interdependent. So then he had a friend, and we're like, you guys can walk together as long, because he was fine once he got to a teacher. It was just in that unstructured hallway. So when he was with his friend, he was fine. He walked there, he made it to class. He didn't get any fights. So that was great. So we faded that back. We started with an adult, and we went to another peer, and then well, hopefully now he was in 8th grade, so we went to the high school. So it was just a really hard time. It was just too crowded in that hallway, and he just didn't like that. So just looking at that data to see when did the student he doesn't need help walking, he just needed help like with the monitoring of the behavior. So thinking about that, when do students are able to do things on their own, but when do they need it to help? And collaborating with the TOR, like I said, I had 3 paraprofessionals that were amazing. We talked on Fridays. Hopefully you guys talked to your teacher of record and say, I used to have to go over here and verbally say this, this, and this. Now I can just go like start writing, and they are doing it. That is data that teachers could use in their IEP writing, all of those kinds of things. So that is very important data. So anytime you can collaborate with your teacher of record, that is what TOR is, the teacher of record. That is super helpful and important. And okay, I'm sure Gail needs to.
What?
Yes. No, I'm sure you guys could understand that too. Like you have to work as a team with your paras.
Right. So this says we have a student who can't write but can come up with the ideas or answers. Someone writes her answers for her, an AI or peer. Then she traces over and repeats the answer.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, and sometimes you can think of accommodations for kids that can't do things like voice to text, or if I had students that, like, if you put them in with somebody else or a team, and one person answers a question, one person writes the answer, one person draws a picture to go with the answer. So you give everybody a part to play. That helps. We use voice to text frequently. That's a really good way to get kids to be independent. There's lots of technology ways to get kids independent now. I taught one of our kids to use Snap and Read app. That's awesome.
Yep, Snap and Read is great. And teaching those students how to use those accommodations is, specially designed instruction, right? That's teaching them how to use those kinds of things if they're there in the IEP. So yes, you're teaching them how to be more independent, which is great. And it's kind of pushing back your prompting and them to be interdependent or independent. And that's just great. So thank you guys for sharing all that. I love the chat. I love it.
Right. And you also, paras often see kids like the para that would follow the kid in the hallway that Alana talked about. Like paras often see kids in different situations. So your observations and the things you observe are really good data that you can share with the teacher about how the student is learning, how many prompts they need, or if they don't need any, or if you hear them talking about, oh, I wish she wouldn't do this for me or that for me. So you do have lots of information that you can share. Yeah,
you have a wealth, tons of information. So you guys sound like you're doing great things. Alisa, I forgot. Are you here or am I still?
I think that one's yours, and then
All right. Sorry, this is new for us, guys.
sharing.
Reduce prompt dependency, as we know. Some classrooms, as you guys probably know, you go into different classrooms, especially if you're in middle school and high school. Elementary, you probably tend to stay in one class. But the teachers that have the routines, it's probably easier for your students to know what comes first, second, and third, right? One great prompt that you could give is writing down actual, like the schedule or what's happening first, second, and third. To reduce like you telling them, but making it more that they could do it. Another way, they can decide which way they want to do that routine. So they can maybe make the picture, or they can maybe make the routine how they want to do it, so that you're not always doing it for them. But what would be a good way that we can that you need to that routine to read it would be great. If they want to use their technology, or if they want to write it down, that's giving them some input that they can use. Using natural cues, we talked about that. Like when the bell rings, sometimes we have like a student that I had a para, had a transfer with a student because he had autism and he had a hard time gathering his materials and moving from one class to another, especially in that middle and high school when you don't have a lot of time. You only have like 5 minutes. So he had to gather all of his things and kind of didn't know when to close up. So, but until she talked to the student. And then when she talked to the student, he said, I don't like to be the first person out of the room, because it's too stressful for my brain and there's too many things going around. So they were trying to get him to, right when the bell rings, put his stuff together and go. And he and until they talked to him, and he's like, I don't really want to do that because it's just too much. It's too chaotic. I like when the bell rings and everybody's gone. And then I like to be the last person out the door. So really getting that input for the students too, sometimes, instead of doing things to them, but doing things with them so that we can figure out the correct goal is very helpful. And I just thought that was a good scenario, thinking about your students. Like, let's see what's going on in their brain, that we're trying to help them with these things, but maybe they don't need that help for that, or there could be a different way that we could use that para in that situation, because there wasn't really any problem with him doing it. They just thought he was kind of needed time to organize his thoughts, and he was really like, I just want to wait. I want to be the last person out. So really getting that input from students is important. And then we talked about using wait time so much, but you're not being lazy. We promise. If you're just waiting for 2 minutes before you help a student or help do something, you're really gathering data to see how long it takes for them to initiate that work that they're trying to do.
Okay, so here's a good idea. Here's a good idea. I take a photo of each step of what a child does for common routines, like unpacking, getting materials out. I print them out and make into a small chart of each activity.
I love that.
That's an awesome idea.
That is an awesome idea. I love pictures and things like that. So that's great.
And that,
Yeah.
if you think about your prompting chart, that would be nonverbal. So that's teaching the kid how to use the chart without you having to tell him what to do.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and planning to fade prompts is like, and then eventually, hopefully, maybe they won't have to use those pictures anymore. I mean, who knows, when they get older, a little bit older. I always talk about my student that we taught her how to do math, or someone taught her how to use touch points, like touch math, when she was doing addition and subtraction. And I knew that she still learned that somehow, because in 7th grade with me, I never gave her touch points, but she would always agree with the dots. I'm like, where are the dots at? And they weren't on the paper, but she knew them. So, they faded those away, but she still figured out how to use them, like for her to use it. But yeah, you can fade those prompts, but the students can probably still find a way to use them how they needed to use them, because she didn't need the physical dots anymore. She knew where they were. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. But we just want to fade them slowly over time and practice in different environments and activities. We know that students might need more prompts in gen ed versus when they're in a resource classroom, versus when they're in a small group or RTI or whatever way they are in. So yes, is there something else in the chat?
Here's a good one. I have a student that will sometimes freeze when I stand nearby, but if I walk away, he will start working. Then I check frequently to see if he needs help. That's really awesome. Like, it's a student saying, hey, I don't need you.
Yep.
Yeah,
I'm okay. I think that's
Yeah,
so,
there's nothing wrong with increasing independence. And that's what we want to do. I used to tell kids, I'm not going to be with you forever. You're going to have to go on without me at some point.
and teachers always need parents, so trust me, there'll be more kids.
Yeah, but give them lots of choices so that they know what works for them. Because after a while, students can tell us, this doesn't really work for me anymore, or I've decided to do it this way. If they're getting the same outcome and they're able to do their work and it's more independent, let's go with it and encourage that.
absolutely. I'm going to go this for you, Alisa. There we go.
Yep.
So there we are. These are the ways we increased independence, through schedules, through routines, planning how we're going to teach the skills, and then having the student gradually take over those skills and use themselves. So we can fade back to visual reminders, or just a nod, or a gesture, so that the student knows what they need to do and they become confident in doing that. Because we don't want them to need us too much. We want them to be able to work independently, but also know that there's a place if you need to come back and touch base. If you need some clarification, here's how you get that. So that they have the opportunity to kind of on their own time frame say, I really do need some help with this. That's what we do as adults. I can handle this. Oh no, I'm going to need some help with this other task.
So I'm going to say something about the plan generalization. So generalization is something that I found my para was really helpful with, especially in the elementary school, when they would go with the kids to different places. Because those kids that struggle with generalizing, para could say, hey, remember this? So an example I always think about is when I was the principal at School for the Blind, I used to take my kids creek stomping in Williams Creek. And I had this student that was totally blind, and I could not for the life of me talk her over this huge boulder that was in the middle of the creek. I was trying as hard as I could to talk her over this boulder, and I was having zero luck. Well, her para came and said, and the para would go with her class to Agape, which is a therapeutic horseback riding. I didn't go. And the para said to the student, hey, that Big Joe, or whatever the name of the horse is, act like you're going to get on Big Joe, because he's really big. And that child threw her leg up over that boulder in one fell swoop. And it was like, I would have still been there trying to talk her over that boulder. But it was that ability of the para to have an idea of how to generalize something for her from one setting to another that helped her be successful going forward. So the rest of the boulders, she just kind of acted like it was Big Joe, and she got over all of them without any more prompting. But that's where paras can come in, because you see the kids in different situations and you can remind them about things that a teacher cannot.
I love that story, Gail. That's awesome.
Isn't that a great story?
And then at the last one, consider sharing the goals with the students as appropriate. So it's okay to let the students know what they're working on. So we're going to work on the organization today. We're going to work on getting started with this. Here are these, how can I help you? Here are what I'm doing right now. I'm verbally talking with you, but you think that this visual might work, or maybe an indirect cue might work, or this gesture means to start working. So really just having them check in with you is really helpful, and you knowing what the goals are in the IEP at a glance, so that you can kind of work with that and then give that data to the teacher, because you do see these kids in lots of different ways, like Gail said. And my paras would go to my different classes with my kids, our kids, and so then they'd come back and they acted differently in math and versus PE, like I said. So you are a wealth of information on those kinds of things. So that's just another idea for you.
And as you know, you have different students and they always have different needs. And having an understanding, the more you get to know your student, the more it can be helpful to understand when and where you need to be more present, or when it's time for them to be more independent. But the goal is we want to get students to a place where they can actually be in charge of their learning as much as possible, and in the environment and their social time as well. But there are lots of different ways for us to support students, and that's what we've given you on this particular slide. Creating a visual reminder or a checklist of things that are needed for a class, handing that over to the student when they're ready to do that themselves. Maybe you create that list together. Maybe they create the list and bring it and check with you. So kind of being able to kind of step back and let students grow as they need to. Setting up materials in ways that they won't need to be prompted. We do a lot of color coding. This is the folder that you take to math. It's everything that's blue goes with that blue math folder, and that goes to math with you. Teaching students to use their peers as appropriate in asking for help or for clarification. Understanding when there are times that it's okay to do that, and other times when maybe that's not okay. Teaching students and making sure that the class really perceives you as someone being there for everyone, not a specific student. There are times when you give specific supports perhaps to a student, and that's per their IEP and how that's put together. But I'm another adult in the room, a responsible adult, and if I can interact and make that more of the general way the classroom works, that can be a way for students to, again, not be so close to us that it's not good for them, but also saying that you don't have to stay away from me either in the classroom. I'm here to support and help all students within my purview, and making sure that kids can understand that. A couple other things on this list, and it's a good one. Writing up a mini summary of a lesson to review. Taking some notes, and then instead of this is one of the things that we did in my classroom. Instead of me just giving you the notes, we talked about that. Now, what were the topics what are 2 things that you recall from the discussion? And let's see if they're on this page. And many times the student had the gist of the information. Working on note taking actually is what that turned into. So kind of building skills, highlighting directions. Prior to handing out work, we probably do that to every child, including our own. Before you start moving, everybody hands up still. Okay, this is what we're going to do, or let's stop and pause, and somebody give this back to me so we know what we're doing. Those are things that can support students without really being around them specifically, because we're kind of supporting everybody that's in that area. I think something just went through the chat about they have someone who can't write but does amazing sketches for note taking. Fantastic, grow that skill.
Yeah.
And then just really thinking about how can we continue to make our students as independent as possible. That's our goal.
He's going to be a comic book writer.
True.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we're about ready to wind things down. We've given you some ideas, and we hope that they are providers of respectable support. I love that phrase that comes from our colleagues. Respectful support. What is one tip from today that you might be able to use in your work tomorrow? Throw something in the chat as you get ready to say goodbye for the afternoon.
I love that. The dog pound, AKA the resource room. I'm telling you, you have a comic book writer on your hands.
That's neat. Working on giving more wait time. Yes. It's a skill that we have to master as adults sometimes.
It's so hard to do, but it is well worth it, that wait time.
Thinking about the ladder before I speak to a child.
For me, that's what mine was. Mine was the ladder. Like I was like, look at all those rungs, however you say it, underneath the ladder above the visual. Like I was very surprised about that. Like starting at the bottom, and I loved that. I thought if I was able to teach my paras, because they don't get explicit instruction from me. Like I was like, just help those students. How to help them? I don't know. Just help them with their dad. I mean, you guys figure it out, right? But you guys don't usually get this great. You don't get instruction. You kind of are like, and I'm guilty of that too. I wish I would have had these things before.
I got better at some of these skills, wait time when I became a parent, as opposed to just a teacher.
I think that Nikki gave you a link to the ladder so you could print it off too.
Yes.
I love the prompt gently. I like that. That's good. And the post-it notes about giving the kids on the post-it notes. Good.
I've heard just right prompts or just right prompts. Did I write that down? I think, yeah, or just
reiterate again tomorrow on how to find context clues for my students who cried while writing. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we can come back at it again. Yeah. Reduce prompting. These are great.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Sometimes I think wait time is for the adults. It's more than students just wait, hold on.
Yes, and I like the smiley face. Sometimes you can just give kids positive reinforcement with a little smiley face, and you can give them to all the kids. It doesn't have to be just one or two. If you work with all the
stickers,
kids.
even middle school kids, they love stickers. Even I teach a college class sometimes, and they like stickers. They think it's fun, like something's fun.
I would love to hear back from someone who takes one of these ideas and goes with it. And so, shoot us a text or an email or something sometime, or got our email addresses in the presentation.
Does anybody have any questions about the information that we've given you?
Yeah, that's kind of all of it. I'm going to give you guys on the left is the evaluation. If you wouldn't mind filling that out for us to get feedback, because we also like feedback. And then on the right, if you want any more trainings, which you guys found us, so I'm sure you know our website, but just in case, that would be great if you could do that before you go. But we will stay around if you have some questions or anything like that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And if there's other topics or other questions that we might be able to bring you answers.
Yeah. We try to be detailed because it helps. Because know that I couldn't do without any of the pairs I have.
That is the truth.
We were a team. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Katie.
All right. Well, then if you can make sure that you fill out the evaluations for us. And again, we'll stay on for a minute longer.
Yeah, it's only 4:15. We're a little early. I love all the.
If somebody has a question that they want just to ask. Otherwise, we'll see you guys next time, 2 weeks. I think the next one's on a Monday too.
The next week would be, this is a third series. So the next one is it modeling, or I'm sorry, accommodations and modifications?
Modifications, yeah, accommodations and modifications is next time.
Yes, Dappy, she said, can you
Yeah.
email me since I'm on my phone? Yes, so Gail
Right.
will email you with
Yes,
the
I
link,
will
right?
send you certificates tomorrow, and then I will send the link with your certificate. So thank you. But yes, I will do that. Okay, so Joyce, you're not the only one.
Hmm.
You're not. If you, the other thing you can do is if you got the link from somebody else and if you don't get a certificate from me tomorrow, then email me and say I didn't get a certificate, because if your name doesn't show up individually on the list for today, I won't know you were here. But I will check with Mark about the emails. He's our tech guy. So there's more than one of you. So I will check with that tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.